The echo of the wedding bells had barely faded when the weight of reality began to settle over Isabella Carter like an unshakable shadow. What had just occurred was not a union, not a celebration, and certainly not a choice. It was a transaction sealed under the illusion of vows. The grand hall, once filled with orchestrated elegance and carefully curated witnesses, now felt hollow. Guests had departed quickly, as if they, too, understood that nothing about this marriage deserved lingering admiration. The air carried a strange stillness, the kind that follows a storm but promises another is already forming. Isabella stood near the towering windows, her reflection staring back at her, dressed in white, yet feeling anything but pure. Her hands tightened slightly around the fabric of her gown, as if grounding herself in the only tangible proof that this nightmare was real. She had imagined many versions of her future. None of them included being trapped in a calculated alliance with a man like Lucian Moretti. Behind her, the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps broke the silence. She didn't need to turn around and know it was him. Lucian moved with the quiet confidence of someone who owned not just a room, but everything and everyone within it. His presence alone shifted the atmosphere, turning the already suffocating space into something far more oppressive. "Admiring your new life," his voice came, smooth yet devoid of warmth. Isabella exhaled slowly before turning to face him. Her expression was controlled, but her eyes betrayed something deeper, defiance wrapped in uncertainty. "I'm trying to understand it," she replied. A faint smirk touched Lucian's lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. Understanding is optional. Acceptance is not. The words landed heavier than they should have. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was charged, filled with unspoken truths and invisible boundaries being drawn. Isabella studied him carefully now. Up close, Lucian Moretti was even more unsettling, not because he was loud or aggressive, but because he wasn't. His calmness felt dangerous, like a weapon he wielded effortlessly. "You could have chosen another way," she said quietly. Lucian tilted his head slightly, as if amused by the thought. "Could I have?" "Yes," she insisted, her voice firmer now. "Whatever this is, this revenge, this arrangement, it didn't have to involve me." For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Not anger, not irritation. Something colder. "It always involved you," he said. The certainty in his tone sent a chill down her spine. "What does that mean?" Lucian took a step closer, closing the distance between them in a way that felt deliberate, calculated. Isabella resisted the instinct to step back. "Your family made choices," he said. "Choices that set this emotion long, before you ever realized. That doesn't make me responsible." "No," he agreed, his voice lowering slightly. "But it makes you useful." The word struck harder than any insult could have. Useful, not a partner, not a person, a tool. And in that moment, Isabella understood something critical. This marriage was never about emotion. It was about leverage. Still, she refused to let him see fear take over completely. "And what happens when I'm no longer useful?" she asked. Lucian's gaze held hers, unwavering. "You won't have that luxury," he replied. A silence followed, thicker now, heavier, because the truth was simple and terrifying. In Lucian's world, people didn't stop being useful, they stopped existing. The realization didn't break Isabella, but it reshaped something inside her. She straightened slightly, her grip on control tightening. "Then I suppose I should learn the rules," she said. Lucian watched her for a moment, as if reassessing something. "Good," he said. "That will make things easier." "For you?" she challenged. "For both of us," he corrected, though his tone suggested otherwise. He turned away then, walking toward the far side of the room where a glass of untouched champagne still sat. He picked it up, studying it briefly before setting it back down without drinking. "Tonight," he continued, "you'll be moved to the main estate." Isabella frowned slightly. "Moved. This was never meant to be your home." Another reminder, nothing here belonged to her. "And where exactly is this estate?" Lucian glanced back at her. "Somewhere you won't be leaving." The answer was as clear as it was unsettling. A controlled environment, isolated, monitored, a gilded cage. Isabella felt the weight of that reality press down on her, but she refused to let it show fully. "You planned everything," she said, more to herself than to him. Yes. There was no hesitation, no denial. That honesty made it worse. How long? She asked. Lucian paused. Long enough. It wasn't an answer. It was a warning. Every detail, every step. This wasn't a sudden act of revenge. It was something constructed carefully over time, which meant one thing. Isabella had been part of his plan long, before she ever stepped into this room. A quiet unease settled deeper within her. What do you actually want from me? She asked finally. Lucian turned to face her fully again. This time, there was something sharper in his gaze. Patience, he said. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting tonight. Frustration flickered across Isabella's face, but she held it in check. Pushing him now would get her nowhere. Instead, she shifted her approach. If I'm going to survive this, she said carefully, I need to know what I'm walking into. Lucian's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in consideration. Survival, he repeated. Interesting choice of words. Accurate ones. For a moment, something almost resembling approval crossed his expression. Then it disappeared. You're walking into a world that doesn't forgive weakness, he said. A world where trust is a liability. And you expect me to just adapt? I expect you to learn. The distinction was subtle but important. Learning meant mistakes weren't tolerated. Isabella nodded slowly, though her mind was already racing ahead. If she was going to survive this, she couldn't remain passive. She needed to observe, understand, find cracks in the system Lucian had built around her, because no system was perfect, even his. Then I'll learn, she said. Lucian held her gaze for a moment longer, as if searching for something beneath her words. Perhaps he expected fear. Perhaps he expected submission. What he saw, instead, was something far more complicated, and far more dangerous in its own way. Good, he said again, though this time the word carried a different weight. A quiet knock sounded at the door. Lucian didn't look away from Isabella as he spoke. Enter. The door opened, and one of his men stepped inside, posture rigid, expression unreadable. It's ready, he said. Lucian gave a slight nod. Then we're done here. The finality in his tone was unmistakable. Isabella felt it, the shift, the moment where one phase ended and another, far more uncertain one, began. She took a small breath, steadying herself. Ready for what? She asked. Lucian stepped closer again, stopping just within her space. For the part of your life you don't get to walk away from. The words were quiet but absolute. He extended his hand, not as a gesture of kindness, but as an expectation. Isabella looked at it for a brief second. Then, slowly, she placed her hand in his. Not because she trusted him, not because she accepted him, but because, for now, she had no other move. As they walked out the hall together, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just stepping into a new home. She was stepping into something far more calculated. Something built long before her arrival. And as the doors closed behind them, sealing away the last piece of her old life, one thought echoed relentlessly in her mind. If this marriage was only the beginning, then what exactly had Lucian been preparing her for all these years? Because whatever it was, she was certain of one thing. It wasn't just revenge, and she was about to find out exactly how deep it went. The drive to the estate was long enough to feel intentional, not long in distance, but in silence. Isabella sat in the back seat of the black car, her hands resting calmly in her lap, though nothing about her thoughts was calm. Outside, the city lights slowly disappeared, replaced by darker, quieter roads that stretched endlessly into isolation. Beside her, Lucian Moretti remained still. He hadn't spoken since they left the hall, hadn't looked at her either, but somehow his silence felt heavier than words. It wasn't absence, it was observation, and Isabella could feel it, not directly, not openly, but in the subtle tension in the air, in the way every movement she made felt noticed, measured, remembered. Lucian wasn't ignoring her. He was studying her, and that was far more unsettling. By the time they arrived, the estate stood before her like something out of control nightmare, massive, guarded, and impossibly quiet. No warmth, no welcome, just structure, order, control, As the gates opened without hesitation, Isabella noticed something immediately. No one questioned Lucian's arrival. No guard spoke. No one delayed him, because no one needed to. He wasn't a man people responded to. He was a man people feared before he even appeared. Inside, the atmosphere didn't change. It deepened. Staff members moved with precision, their eyes lowered, their steps careful, like one wrong move could cost them everything. No one greeted him. No one asked questions. They simply adjusted around his presence. And Isabella understood something instantly. Lucian Moretti didn't demand respect. He eliminated the possibility of disrespect. He walked ahead without looking back, not checking if she followed, not needing to, because in his world, people didn't choose to follow. They knew they had to. Still, Isabella kept pace, her gaze quietly observing everything. The layout, the people, the exits, not out of panic, but instinct. If she was going to survive here, she needed to understand it. Every detail mattered. They entered a large interior hall, dimly lit, elegant, but cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Lucian finally stopped. Slowly, he turned to face her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. And then, "You're not afraid enough." The words were calm, but they landed with sharp precision. Isabella blinked slightly, caught off guard, not by the statement, but by how accurate it felt. "I think I'm exactly as afraid as I should be," she replied. Lucian studied her again, longer this time, as if adjusting a calculation. "Most people in your position don't look at the exits," he said. Isabella didn't react immediately, but inside, something tightened. So he had noticed. Of course he had. "You built a place where people feel trapped," she said quietly. "It would be strange not to look for a way out." Lucian's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Not softer, sharper. "Interesting," he murmured, because the truth was this. Lucian Moretti didn't fear betrayal. He expected it. The only thing he valued was how long it took someone to try. He turned away again, walking slowly toward the staircase. "Come," he said. Isabella followed. As they moved through the estate, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a home. It was a system. Every person had a place. Every movement had purpose. And at the center of it all was Lucian, not as a leader people loved, but as one they obeyed without hesitation. "Your reputation," Isabella said suddenly, breaking the silence. Lucian didn't stop walking. "What about it?" "They say you don't feel anything." A pause, not in his steps, but in the air around him. "And what do you think?" he asked. Isabella considered her answer carefully. "You feel," she said. "You just don't allow it to matter." Lucian stopped. Slowly, he turned to look at her. This time, there was no indifference in his gaze. There was focus, pure, undivided attention. "And why would that be?" he asked. Isabella held his gaze. "Because caring makes people predictable," she said. "And predictable people can be controlled." A silence followed. Heavy, not empty. Measured. Lucian stepped closer. Close enough now that the distance between them felt intentional. "Love," he said quietly, "is not just predictable." Isabella didn't move. "It's a weakness," he finished. There it was. Not a belief. A rule. One he lived by. One he never broke. And suddenly, Isabella understood something critical. Lucian Moretti wasn't incapable of love. He had simply decided it was something he would never allow himself to have. They reached the top of the stairs. A long corridor stretched ahead. Lucian gestured toward a door at the end. "That's yours." Isabella frowned slightly. "Mine." "You'll stay there." No explanation. No conditions. Just a statement. When she stepped inside, she paused. The room was unexpected. Not empty. Not cold. It was fully prepared. Elegant. Comfortable. Carefully designed. Not like a prison. More like a place meant to be lived in. And that was what made it unsettling. Lucian remained at the doorway, watching her reaction, not speaking, just observing. Again, always observing. "You prepared this," she said. "Yes." "For me?" "Yes." Isabella turned to face him. "Why?" A simple question, but it carried weight. Because nothing Lucian did was without purpose. For a moment, he didn't answer, and in that silence, something unfamiliar crept in. Not fear, not control. Something else. Something quieter. "You're not like the others," he said finally. Isabella's brows tightened slightly. "The others?" "The ones who break," he clarified. A chill ran through her. "So this is a test?" Lucian didn't respond directly. Instead, he stepped inside the room. Slowly, measured. "You're here because you matter," he said. The words sounded wrong. Not because of what they meant, but because of who said them. Isabella studied him carefully now, because something wasn't adding up. A man who built his empire on fear. A man who saw love as weakness. A man who treated people as tools. Would not keep someone close without reason. And yet, he wasn't treating her like a prisoner. "You don't keep things you don't need," she said. Lucian's gaze darkened slightly. "No," he agreed. "Then why keep me?" Another pause. Another calculation. This time when he spoke, his voice was quieter, more deliberate. "You'll understand soon." Not an answer, a promise. Isabella felt it then, that shift inside her, the one she didn't expect, the one she shouldn't allow. Fear was still there, strong, unavoidable. But now, there was something else tangled within it. Curiosity. Dangerous. Growing curiosity. Because Lucian Moretti didn't make mistakes. And if he had chosen to keep her close, then she wasn't just part of his plan. She was something far more specific. As Lucian turned to leave, the staff outside the corridor stiffened instantly. Eyes lowered, breathing controlled. Waiting. Always waiting. He stopped just before stepping out. Without turning back, he spoke. "Make sure she has everything she needs." One of the staff members responded immediately. "Yes, sir." Isabella watched carefully, because something about that moment felt wrong. Not the command, but the reaction. The staff looked confused. Not openly. Not enough to risk being seen. But it was there, a hesitation, a flicker of something unexpected. Because this wasn't how Lucian Moretti operated. He didn't provide comfort. He didn't create space. He didn't care. And yet, he had just ordered exactly that. Isabella's gaze shifted back to him, and for the first time, she didn't just see danger. She saw a question. Lucian stepped forward. The staff immediately moved into action. Silent, efficient, obedient. But beneath that obedience, there was something else now. Uncertainty. And as Isabella stood in the doorway of a room that felt too prepared, too intentional, one realization settled deeply into her mind. She was not being held here by force alone. She was being kept, chosen, and no one, not even the people who feared him most, seemed to understand why. Because as Lucian walked away, issuing orders that contradicted everything he was known for, one truth became impossible to ignore. Lucian Moretti had made a decision that defied his own rules, and whatever reason was behind it, it was something no one in this house was prepared for. The door closed behind Lucian with a quiet finality, leaving Isabella alone in a space that felt far too deliberate to be accidental. The room was still, not empty, but waiting. She stood in the center for a moment, unmoving, her eyes scanning every detail again. The polished surfaces, the carefully chosen furniture, the untouched arrangement of objects. It all carried the same unsettling message. This place had been prepared, not recently, not suddenly, but with time, with intention, for her. A slow breath filled her lungs as she stepped further inside, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of a table. No dust, no imperfection, nothing out of place. It wasn't comfort. It was control disguised as care. Outside the large windows, the estate stretched endlessly. Secured gates, distant guards, controlled movement. Beautiful, untouchable, unescapable. Isabella walked toward the mirror, stopping just short of her reflection. She barely recognized herself anymore, not because she had changed, but because everything around her had. Her life had shifted so suddenly, so completely, that it felt like she had been placed into someone else's story, and she didn't know her role in it. Hours passed quietly. No interruptions, no instructions, no confrontation. And that, more than anything, unsettled her. because she had expected something else. Control, pressure, demands, punishment. But instead, she had been left alone. Observation, she whispered under her breath. The word felt right. Too right. Lucian wasn't ignoring her. He was watching, waiting, learning. That realization settled heavily in her chest. Because being controlled was one thing, but being studied, that meant she was being understood, and that was far more dangerous. A soft knock broke the silence. Isabella turned slightly. "Come in." A staff member entered quietly, carrying a tray. Food, water, everything arranged with precision. "Is there anything else you require?" the woman asked, her voice careful, almost too careful. Isabella studied her briefly. There was again that tension, that quiet unease beneath obedience. "No," Isabella said gently. "This is enough." The woman nodded quickly, placing the tray down. But she didn't leave immediately. A hesitation. Small, almost invisible. Isabella noticed. "Something wrong?" she asked. The woman froze slightly, then shook her head. "No, ma'am." But the answer came too fast, too rehearsed. Isabella stepped closer. "You can speak," she said softly. For a moment, it looked like the woman might actually say something. But then, "It's just, things are different," she murmured, barely audible. "Different how?" A pause. Then, carefully, "He doesn't do this." Isabella's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do what?" The woman hesitated again. "Prepare," she said. "Not like this." That confirmed it. This wasn't normal. Not even in Lucian's world. "Thank you," Isabella said quietly. The woman nodded and left quickly, as if staying longer was a risk. The door closed again, and the silence returned. But now, it felt louder. Because the most dangerous secrets are not the ones people hide. They're the ones they prepare for long, before anyone realizes they exist. Isabella turned back toward the room, her thoughts sharper now. Lucian Moretti had built an empire on control, fear, and precision. A man like that didn't act without reason. He didn't create space without purpose. He didn't prepare for someone unless he knew they were coming. And that meant one thing. This wasn't just about her father. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about her. A quiet tension settled deeper in her chest. Because if Lucian knew something about her, something she didn't, then this wasn't a situation she could simply understand. It was something she had to uncover. Across the estate, in a private office far removed from the quiet stillness of Isabella's room, Lucian stood near a large desk, his expression unreadable as always. The room reflected him perfectly. Minimal, controlled, efficient, nothing unnecessary. One of his men stepped inside, holding a sealed folder. "Sir," Lucian didn't turn immediately. "What is it?" "It just arrived." A pause. Then, "It's marked confidential." That was enough. Lucian turned. His gaze dropped briefly to the folder before he took it. No hesitation. No curiosity visible. But something in the air shifted. "Leave," he said. The man exited instantly. The door shut, and silence took over. Lucian stood still for a moment, the folder in his hand. Unopened, untouched, as if even he understood that whatever was inside carried weight. Then, slowly, he opened it. Inside were documents, photographs, records, carefully compiled information. His eyes moved across the first page, then the next, and then he stopped. For the first time since Isabella had met him, something changed. It was subtle, almost invisible, but undeniable. His expression shifted, not into anger, not into shock, but into something far more dangerous. Recognition. A long silence filled the room. Heavy, unmoving. Lucian closed the file halfway, his gaze distant now, not unfocused, but calculating in a way that hadn't been there before. As if something he had believed, something he had planned, was no longer certain. Across the estate, Isabella stood by the window again, unaware of what had just shifted, but she felt it, not clearly, not logically, but instinctively. Something had changed, and whatever it was connected to her, because in that moment, in a room filled with secrets she didn't yet understand, One truth settled deep within her. She wasn't just part of Lucian's plan. She was at the center of it. And as Lucian slowly looked back down at the file in his hands, his jaw tightening just slightly, one realization became impossible to ignore. Whatever he had just read had just rewritten everything. Because for the first time, Lucian Moretti didn't look in control. And that meant only one thing. The truth about Isabella Carter was far more dangerous than even he had anticipated. Lucian did not move for a long time after reading the file. The silence in his office no longer felt like control. It felt like calculation under pressure. The documents in his hand were not unexpected in nature, but they were precise in a way that disrupted something far deeper than strategy. Every detail aligned too perfectly, as if a truth long buried had quietly resurfaced without permission. Isabella Carter was no longer just a piece in motion. She was a point of origin. He placed the file on the desk, but his gaze did not leave it. Names, transactions, coded exchanges, things most people would never recognize had been carefully traced back through years of hidden operations. And there it was, embedded within the structure like a flaw that had gone unnoticed for too long. Her family was not clean, not distant from the underworld as they appeared. They had been connected, indirectly but undeniably, to networks that operated in the same shadows Lucian controlled. That alone was not enough to shake him. Many families brushed against darkness without understanding its depth, but this was different. This connection was older, intentional, and dangerously close to something he had spent years hunting. His jaw tightened slightly as a memory surfaced, not invited, but impossible to ignore. A time when trust had not yet been something he eliminated. A time when alliances were not built solely on fear. There had been someone once. Someone close enough to stand beside him, not beneath him. Someone who understood the system as he did. And that had been the problem. Betrayal, when it came, had not been loud. It had been precise, quiet, executed with the same intelligence Lucian himself respected. It had cost him more than power. It had cost him certainty. Since then, he had removed the possibility of that kind of weakness entirely. And now, standing in a room built on absolute control, he was staring at evidence that traced back to that same fracture in his past. Isabella was connected to it, not by choice, not by action, but by blood. The realization did not bring anger. It brought clarity, and with it, a shift in the stakes. This was no longer revenge in its original form. This was something unfinished, something that had been waiting, unresolved, moving quietly through time until it reached this exact moment. Lucian leaned back slightly, his mind reconstructing every decision he had made regarding her. Every step had been calculated, but now the foundation of that calculation had changed. She was never random, never incidental. She had always been part of this, even if she had no knowledge of it. That made her dangerous in a way she did not yet understand. Across the estate, Isabella stood in the same room that still felt too prepared, too intentional. The silence around her had started to shift from confusion into something more unsettling. It was no longer just about where she was. It was about why she was here. She sat slowly, her thoughts circling back to everything she knew about her family. Respectable. Struggling, yes, but honest. That was the narrative she had grown up with. There had been no signs of anything darker, no warnings, no hints that their past held anything worth hiding. And yet, nothing about her current reality aligned with that belief anymore. Lucian's behavior alone proved that. A man like him did not act on assumptions. He acted on information, which meant he knew something about her, something she did not know about herself. Her fingers tightened slightly as a quiet unease settled deeper within her. Memories began to shift under a new lens. Conversations that once felt ordinary now felt incomplete. Decisions her father had made suddenly carried weight she had never questioned before. Had there been signs? Or had she simply never been meant to see them? The thought was unsettling in a way she could not ignore. Because if her life had been built on something hidden, then every choice she had made was shaped by a truth she was never given. And that meant one thing. She did not fully know who she was. The realization was not loud. It did not break her. But it changed something fundamental. Identity, once stable, now felt uncertain. And in a world like Lucian's, uncertainty was not just dangerous, it was exploitable. Back in his office, Lucian picked up a file again, turning to the final section. This part had not been included in the initial summary. It had arrived separately, added with urgency. That alone made it significant. He opened it. His eyes moved quickly at first, then slowed, then stopped. This time, the reaction was immediate, not visible in expression, but in stillness, absolute stillness. The information was recent, active, not history, but movement. Someone else had been searching, quietly but with precision, the same kind of precision Lucian himself respected. They were not looking for her family. They were looking for Isabella. His gaze darkened slightly as the implications settled in. This was no coincidence, no delayed consequence. This was a second force entering the same space, moving toward the same target. And unlike Isabella, they knew exactly what they were looking for. Lucian closed the file slowly, his mind already shifting strategies. This changed everything. Control was no longer contained within his system. There was another player now, one with enough reach to access information that should have remained buried, which meant one thing. They were powerful, powerful enough to challenge him. For the first time, the situation was no longer singular. It was no longer just about what he had planned. It was about what was coming. Across the estate, Isabella stood again, moving toward the window as a quiet tension settled into something sharper. She did not know what had changed, but she felt it with increasing certainty. Something was moving beneath the surface, something she was connected to, and whatever it was no longer hidden. Back in the office, Lucian stepped forward, his decision forming with absolute clarity. Isabella was no longer just part of the control plan. She had become a variable in something far more volatile. And variables, in his world, were either controlled or eliminated. But this time, the decision was not that simple. Because as he looked down at the file one last time, one truth became impossible to ignore. He was not the only one who had found her. And whoever was searching for Isabella Carter was close enough, powerful enough, and dangerous enough to force a confrontation Lucian had not planned for. The shift in his state was subtle, but impossible to ignore. Isabella felt it before she understood it. The air was tighter, movements sharper, conversations shorter, quieter, more controlled. Guards were no longer just present. They were positioned, watching not just the outside world, but the inside as well. Something had changed. And this time, it wasn't just about her instincts. It was real. She stood near the window, her eyes tracing perimeter again, but now the stillness outside felt different. Not calm, contained, as if something was being held back rather than kept out. Behind her, the door opened without warning. Lucian stepped in. No hesitation, no announcement, just presence. Isabella turned, her expression steady, though her thoughts had already begun racing ahead. He wouldn't come here without reason. Not now, not after whatever had shifted. You felt it, he said, closing the door behind him. It wasn't a question. Isabella held his gaze. Something's changed. Yes. The answer was immediate, direct, and heavier than anything he had said before. A quiet tension settled between them as Lucian took a few steps forward, stopping just short of where she stood. His expression was controlled, but there was something beneath it now. Something sharper, more focused, not uncertainty. Preparation. You're no longer just part of the situation, he said. Isabella's brows tightened slightly. I never was. Lucian didn't argue. Instead, he delivered the truth with the same precision he applied to everything else. You're being hunted. The words didn't echo. They landed. Hard. Isabella didn't react immediately. Not outwardly. But something inside her shifted. Fast, sharp, undeniable. Hunted, she repeated quietly. Yes. By now, she understood one thing about Lucian Moretti. He didn't exaggerate, which meant this wasn't possibility. It was a reality. By who? She asked. Lucian's gaze didn't waver. That's not information you need right now. That's not how this works, she said, her voice firmer now. If I'm the one in danger, I deserve to know. You deserve to stay alive, he interrupted. The words cut through everything else. Cold, absolute. For a moment, silence followed. Not empty, restrained. Because this wasn't just a conversation. It was a shift in power. And for the first time, Isabella felt it push harder against her. Because the most dangerous cages are not built with walls. They're built with reasons you can't argue against. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to think clearly. Why? She asked. Why me? Lucian didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't know, but because he was deciding how much to say. You have value, he said finally. The words felt familiar. Too familiar. Strategic value, he added. And there it was. Not personal. Not emotional. Calculated. Isabella stepped back slightly, her arms crossing unconsciously, not defensive, but grounding. So, I'm a target, she said, because of something I don't even understand. Yes. And your solution is what? She pressed. Lock me in here? Lucian's expression didn't change. You stay under my protection. The statement was final, not a suggestion, not an offer, a decision. Isabella let out a quiet, disbelieving breath. Protection? She repeated. This feels more like imprisonment. Lucian took a step closer. Outside this estate, he said, you won't last a day. The certainty in his voice wasn't threatening. It was factual, and that made it worse. Isabella searched his face, trying to find something, anything, that wasn't calculated. Do I have a choice? She asked. Lucian didn't hesitate. No. The words settled between them like something solid, unmovable. And for the first time since arriving here, Isabella felt it fully. Not just the loss of control, but the absence of it. Completely. Still, she didn't look away. Then let me understand something, she said quietly. Am I your responsibility or your possession? Lucian's gaze darkened slightly, but not with anger, with something more complex. You're under my protection, he repeated. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. Frustration flickered through her, but she forced it down, because reacting emotionally wouldn't change the situation. Understanding it might. She shifted slightly, her tone quieter now. You're not doing this out of kindness, she said. No, at least you're honest. Lucian's expression remained unchanged. Kindness is inefficient. That answered one question, but raised another. Then why? She asked again. This time, Lucian didn't respond immediately. His silence stretched just long enough to feel intentional, measured. Because if someone is coming for you, he said slowly, they're not just a threat to you. Isabella's eyes narrowed slightly. They're a threat to you, she realized. Lucian didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. And that was enough, which meant this wasn't just about her safety. It was about control, about maintaining dominance over something that was starting to move beyond him. Isabella turned slightly, her gaze drifting back toward the window. The estate no longer looked like a place she was trapped in. It looked like a place under pressure. You're always calculating, she said quietly. Lucian didn't respond, but that, too, was an answer. She looked back at him. And where do I fit in those calculations? A pause. Then, at the center, the words were calm, but they changed everything. Because being at the center didn't mean safety. It meant significance. And significance, in Lucian's world, came with consequences. A slow tension built inside her. Not just fear now, but something more complicated. Because part of her understood the logic, understood the necessity, understood that staying here might actually be the only way to survive. And that was a problem. Because the more she understood it, the harder it became to fight it. That was how control worked. Not through force, but through inevitability. And slowly, quietly, something began to shift inside her. Not trust, not acceptance, but something far more dangerous. Dependence. Lucian stepped back slightly, his focus already shifting beyond the room. We move tonight, he said. Isabella frowned. Move. Internal repositioning, he clarified. You won't stay in this wing. Another adjustment, another layer of control. Is that supposed to make me feel safer? She asked. It's not supposed to make you feel anything, he replied. "It's supposed to keep you alive." A sharp knock interrupted the moment. Lucian turned toward the door. "Enter." One of his men stepped inside, his posture more tense than before. "Sir," he said, "we've confirmed movement." Lucian's expression didn't change, but the room did, instantly. "Where?" he asked. "Closer than expected." A pause. Then, "They found the outer perimeter." Silence, but not the kind Isabella had grown used to. This one was different, charged, immediate. Lucian's eyes shifted slightly, just enough to reveal something beneath the surface. Not fear, but readiness. "How many?" he asked. "Unknown." That was worse. Lucian gave a small nod. "Already moving." "Lock down the state," he ordered. "No one in, no one out." "Yes, sir." The man exited quickly. The door shut. Isabella's pulse had quickened, but her expression remained controlled. "They're here," she said. Lucian looked at her. Yes. No reassurance. No comfort. Just truth. And for the first time, Isabella saw it clearly. This wasn't a distant threat. It wasn't something approaching slowly. It was already at the door. Her gaze held his. "Now what?" Lucian's expression sharpened. Every trace of stillness replaced by something far more dangerous. "Action. We end it," he said. And in that moment, Isabella understood something she hadn't before. Lucian Moretti didn't wait for danger to arrive. He walked toward it. As the estate shifted into full lockdown, and the quiet control of the night shattered into something far more volatile, one truth became impossible to ignore. The people hunting her had found her, and Lucian was no longer preparing to protect her. He was preparing for war. The night of confrontation did not unfold the way Isabella expected. There were no explosions, no chaos spilling through the halls, no visible war breaking the silence of the estate. Instead, everything was handled before it could become visible. Quietly, efficiently, as if the threat had been anticipated long before it arrived. By morning, the estate looked the same, but Isabella knew better. Something had been tested, and Lucian had responded, not with force alone, but with structure. That was when she began to understand the difference. Lucian's world was not built on power. It was built on control. The days that followed were no longer empty. Isabella was no longer left isolated without purpose. Instead, she was moved, strategically, deliberately, into spaces she had not seen before. Not freely, never freely, but intentionally. She began to witness fragments of something much larger than she had imagined. Rooms filled with quiet conversations. Screens displaying shifting data. Voices speaking in measured tones about movements, agreements, disruptions. Names of cities, organizations, and operations passed between people as if they were pieces on a board. This was not chaos. This was coordination. Lucian did not run an empire that reacted. He ran one that predicted, and more importantly, one that prevented. She stood silently in one of the upper observation areas, her presence unspoken but not unnoticed. No one questioned her being there. No one acknowledged it either, because if she was there, it meant Lucian allowed it, and no one challenged that. Below, a meeting unfolded. Men spoke carefully, each word chosen with precision. There was no room for error, no room for emotion. Information was presented. Decisions were made, and everything moved forward without hesitation. Then Lucian spoke, and everything stopped, not because he raised his voice, but because he didn't need to. He asked questions no one else thought to ask. He pointed out gaps no one else had seen. He dismantled flawed logic with quiet clarity, leaving no space for argument. He didn't dominate the room. He controlled it, completely. Isabella watched carefully, her mind absorbing every detail. Not just what he said, but how he said it. The timing, the restraint, the precision. Nothing was wasted. Not words, not movements, not attention. And slowly, something inside her began to shift. Fear didn't disappear, but it changed. It became structured, directed, useful, because the more she observed, the more she realized something critical. Survival here was not about resistance. It was about understanding. She began to notice patterns. Who spoke first? Who hesitated? Who avoided direct answers? who Lucian trusted, and more importantly, who he didn't. Trust, in this world, was not given. It was measured, constantly. Every action, every decision, it all added up to something larger, a system that never stopped evaluating itself. And now, it was evaluating her. The realization did not unsettle her the way it once would have. Instead, it sharpened her awareness. Because if she was being studied, then she could study back. And for the first time since arriving here, Isabella didn't feel completely powerless. She felt aware. It was a dangerous shift, but a necessary one, because in Lucian's world, ignorance was a liability, and she could no longer afford to be one. One evening, as another meeting concluded and the room slowly emptied, Isabella remained where she was, her thoughts moving faster than before. Lucian didn't look up at her immediately, but he knew she was there. He always did. "You're learning," he said, without turning. It wasn't a question. Isabella stepped forward slightly. "I'm observing." A pause. Then, "That's the same thing here." She considered that, and realized he was right. Observation wasn't passive in this world. It was preparation. "For what?" she asked. Lucian finally looked up at her. His gaze was steady, unreadable, for survival. The answer was simple, but absolute. Isabella held his gaze, something stronger settling within her now. "And if I learn enough?" she asked. Lucian studied her for a moment, longer than usual, as if reassessing something. "Then you stop being a liability," he said. Not comfort, not reassurance. But it was something, and in this world, something was enough. Days turned into a rhythm, not comfortable, not safe, but predictable in a way that allowed Isabella to adapt. She moved through the estate with more awareness now. She listened more carefully, spoke less, watched everything, and slowly, the confusion that once clouded her thoughts began to clear, because she no longer saw this place as just a prison. She saw it for what it really was. A system, one she could learn, one she could navigate, maybe even one she could survive. But survival here came with a cost, because the more she understood, the more she changed, and she could feel it, in the way she thought, in the way she reacted, in the way fear no longer controlled her. It informed her, and that was the most dangerous shift of all, because it meant she was no longer just reacting to Lucian's world. She was beginning to think like it, because the moment you stop fearing a system and start understanding it, you become part of it. One night, unable to quiet her thoughts, Isabella moved beyond the usual areas she'd been allowed to access. Not recklessly, not blindly, carefully, every step measured, every turn remembered. She wasn't escaping. She was exploring. There was a difference. The lower level of the estate was quieter, less movement, less visibility, but not unguarded, never unguarded. Still, she noticed something, a section that didn't align with the rest of the structure. No visible activity, no clear purpose, but too secure to be irrelevant. Her instincts sharpened immediately. This was not part of what she had been shown, which meant it mattered. She moved closer, her step silent, her focus absolute. The door ahead was reinforced, far more than any other she had seen. No markings, no indication of what lay beyond. But that was the point. It wasn't meant to be known. Isabella hesitated for only a second. Then she acted, not by forcing entry, but by observing. A panel beside the door, a coded system, more advanced than anything used elsewhere in the estate. Her mind moved quickly, analyzing what little she could see. This wasn't storage. This wasn't security. This was containment. Something kept hidden. Something important enough to isolate even within an empire built on secrecy. Her pulse slowed, not from calm, but from focus, because now she understood there were layers to this world she had not yet seen. And this was one of them. A faint sound behind her made her turn slightly. Nothing, but not nothing. Presence. Subtle, controlled, familiar. Lucian, of course. He stepped forward just enough to be seen, his expression unreadable as always. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. His voice wasn't angry, but it wasn't neutral either. Isabella met his gaze, Steady. I noticed that. A pause. Then, the silence near the hidden door did not break immediately. It stretched, deliberate and heavy, as if both of them understood that something irreversible had already begun. Isabella had crossed a line that was never meant to be visible, and Lucian had allowed her to stand there long enough to realize it. That alone was decision. Lucian stepped past her, his presence shifting from observer to something more defined. Control returned to him instantly, not through force, but through certainty. He entered a code into the panel beside the reinforced door without hesitation. Isabella watched carefully. The system responded in silence. No alarms, no warnings. The door unlocked. That, more than anything, told her how deep this moment ran. "You wanted answers," Lucian said, his voice calm. "Now you'll understand the cost of asking for them." The door opened slowly. What lay beyond was not what Isabella expected. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't violence. It was structure, far more advanced than anything she had seen in the state. Screens lined the walls, data moving in real time across multiple systems. Names, locations, financial channels, encrypted communications, all interconnected in a way that felt less like an operation and more like a living network. This wasn't part of his empire. This was its core. Isabella stepped inside, her mind immediately shifting into focus. This wasn't just hidden for secrecy. It was hidden because it controlled everything else. Lucian watched her reaction closely, not for fear, for comprehension. "You built this," she said quietly. "Yes." "How many people know about it?" "Fewer than you think." The answer carried weight, because now she was one of them. Isabella moved slowly through the space, her eyes scanning everything with growing awareness. This was not just about power. This was about precision, at a level she hadn't fully understood before. Every system connected, every movement tracked, every decision calculated. "This is how you stay ahead," she said. Lucian didn't respond, because she was no longer asking. She was understanding, and that was exactly what he had intended. He stepped closer, his voice lowering slightly, not softer, but more focused. "You've seen enough." Isabella turned to him. "And now?" she asked. A pause. Then, "Now you become part of it." The words settled between them with quiet force. Not symbolic, not abstract, real, immediate. Isabella held his gaze, something inside her tightening, not with fear, but with awareness of what was being asked. "This isn't observation anymore," she said. "No, it's involvement." "Yes." Her next words came slower. "Why?" Lucian studied her, his expression unchanged, but his attention absolute. "Because you're already involved," he said. Isabella's brows tightened slightly. "That's not an answer. It's the truth." He stepped closer, closing the space between them again. "Everything happening right now, every movement, every threat, every shift, you're at the center of it." She didn't look away. "I didn't choose that." "No," Lucian agreed. "But you can choose what happens next." There it was. The shift, not control. Choice. And somehow, that felt heavier. Because in a world built on control, being given a choice is not freedom. It's responsibility. Isabella exhaled slowly, her thoughts moving faster now, connecting everything she had seen, everything she had learned. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. Lucian didn't hesitate. "There's a meeting," he said. "External. High level. They're expecting a representative. And you want that to be me?" "Yes." The answer came too easily, too precisely. "This is a test," she said. Lucian didn't deny it. "Everything here is." Isabella turned slightly, her gaze drifting back to the systems around them. "This isn't just about delivering a message," she said. "No, it's about how I handle it." "Yes, and what you learn from it." Lucian's silence confirmed it. She nodded slowly, the weight of the situation settling deeper now. "If I do this," she said, "I'm not just surviving here anymore." Lucian's gaze sharpened slightly. "No," he said, "you're influencing it." The words changed everything, because survival was reactive. Influence was not. Isabella looked back at him fully now. "And if I refuse?" A pause. Not long, but enough. Then you remain what you were when you arrived, Lucian said. A variable. The word felt distant now, almost unfamiliar, because she had already moved beyond that. They both knew it. This isn't about trust, she said. No, it's about control. Yes. Another pause. Then, but not just mine, Lucian added. That caught her attention, because it meant something she hadn't considered fully until now. Her decision didn't just affect her. It affected him, the system, the outcome, everything. Isabella's thoughts sharpened further. You're giving me access, she said. Yes. You're letting me act on your behalf. Yes. And you're watching to see what I do with it. Lucian didn't respond. He didn't need to. The answer was already clear. The room fell into silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy with uncertainty. It was filled with decision. Isabella felt it clearly now. The pressure, the weight, the significance of what stood in front of her. Loyalty or freedom. Survival or truth. Not in abstract terms, but in action. Because whatever she chose would define what she became in this world. And more dangerously, what Lucian allowed her to become. She stepped slightly closer to him, her voice quieter now, but steady. You're not just testing me, she said. Lucian's gaze held hers. No, you're measuring risk. Yes, and deciding if I'm worth it. A pause. Then, yes. The honesty didn't shock her anymore. It clarified things. And clarity was power. For the first time since stepping into his world, Isabella felt something shift completely. Not fear, not confusion, but control of her own perspective. She wasn't trapped in his system anymore. She was standing within it, aware of it, and now capable of affecting it. Her choice mattered, not just to her, but to him, to his empire, to whatever was coming next. She understood that now, completely, and that understanding changed the way she looked at him, not as just a captor, not just a protector, but as something far more complex. A man who had built a system so precise that even he could not fully control what happened when someone unexpected entered it. You chose me, she said finally. Lucian didn't respond immediately, but this time there was no avoidance in his silence, only calculation, and something else, something quieter. You weren't chosen randomly, he said. Isabella's eyes narrowed slightly. I already know that. Lucian stepped closer, his voice lowering just enough to shift the weight of his words. No, he said. You don't. A pause. Then, I didn't choose you because of your family, he continued. That stopped her, completely, because everything she had understood until now shifted. What does that mean? She asked. Lucian's gaze didn't move, didn't soften, but something in it changed. Something deeper, more personal, more dangerous than anything he had revealed before. It means, he said slowly, you were chosen long before this began. The words landed heavier than anything else he had said, because they didn't point to strategy. They pointed to history, to something she didn't know, something she had never been told. And as a silence stretched between them, filled with a truth she couldn't yet see but could already feel, one realization settled deep within her. This was never just about power, never just about revenge. It was about something far more personal. And whatever that truth was, Lucian Moretti was about to reveal why he chose her, and it was going to change everything she believed about herself. The truth did not come all at once. Lucian did not reveal it like confession. He revealed it like everything else in his world. Precise, controlled, and timed for maximum impact. But once it began, it could not be undone. Isabella stood in the center of the hidden system that controlled his empire, her mind still processing his last words. You were chosen long before this began. The statement had not been strategic. It had been personal. And that made it far more dangerous. Lucian watched her closely, not as a man observing a variable, but as someone measuring the reaction to something irreversible. You deserve to understand why you're here, he said. Isabella's gaze did not waver, then stopped speaking in fragments. A pause. Then Lucian moved not away, but closer, as if narrowing the distance between past and present. There was a man, he began, his voice calm but carrying something deeper beneath it, who once stood where no one stands now. Isabella said nothing. She understood instinctively. This was not just information. This was history. He wasn't beneath me, Lucian continued. He wasn't controlled. He was trusted. The word fell out of place. Trusted. It didn't belong to Lucian's world. Not anymore. What happened? Isabella asked quietly. Lucian's expression did not change, but something in the silence did. He betrayed me. The answer was simple, but final. No elaboration. No emotion. And yet, it carried weight far beyond the words. Isabella felt it, not just as a story, but as something that had shaped everything she had seen since arriving here. That's why you built this, she said. This system, this control. Yes. So it never happens again. Yes. Another pause. Then, and I'm connected to him, she said. Not a question, a realization. Lucian's gaze held hers. Yes. The words settled into place like something inevitable. Isabella exhaled slowly, her thoughts aligning in a way they hadn't before. My family, she said. He was part of it. Lucian didn't correct her, which meant she was right. And suddenly, everything made sense. The hidden connections, the unexplained attention, the fact that she had never truly been random in any of this. She had always been part of something unfinished. Because some legacies are not inherited through memory. They are inherited through consequences. Isabella turned slightly, her mind moving through every moment of her life with a new perspective. The past she thought she understood now felt incomplete. Every unanswered question now had a direction. You didn't just bring me here for revenge, she said. No, you brought me here because I'm connected to something you couldn't finish. Yes, and you think I can. Lucian didn't respond immediately, but the silence itself answered her. She looked back at him, her expression no longer uncertain. It was focused. You're not trying to control me, she said. Lucian's gaze sharpened slightly. No, you're trying to use me. A pause. Then, yes. The honesty didn't surprise her anymore. It clarified everything. And if I refuse, she asked. Lucian stepped closer, his presence steady, controlled, but not untouched. You won't, he said. The certainty in his voice should have felt like control. But it didn't, because Isabella understood something now that she hadn't before. You're wrong, she said quietly. For the first time, Lucian didn't respond immediately, because the dynamic had shifted, not in power, but in awareness. Isabella stepped forward, closing the space between them. You built an empire where no one can challenge you, she said, where every outcome is calculated, every risk controlled. Lucian watched her, silent. But I'm not part of that system, she continued. A pause. Then, I'm the one thing you didn't calculate correctly. That was the moment, the shift, subtle but irreversible. Lucian's gaze didn't harden. It didn't react with anger, but something in it changed, because for the first time, he wasn't just observing her. He was reassessing her. You think that gives you power, he said. No, Isabel replied. I know it does. Silence followed, but it was no longer controlled by him alone, because the truth had changed the structure between them. She was no longer just a part of his past. She was now part of his present, and more dangerously, his future. The days that followed moved quickly, not in chaos, but in escalation. The external threat that had been closing and finally surfaced fully. The people searching for Isabella were no longer distant. They acted, strategically, directly, and the confrontation Lucian had anticipated began to unfold. But this time, he did not handle it alone. Isabella stood beside him, not as a prisoner, not as an observer, but as someone who understood what was at stake. Her role was no longer unclear. She was a connection, the key, the variable that could resolve what had been left unfinished. And when the moment came, she made a choice, not based on fear, not based on survival, but on understanding. She stepped into the conflict in a way Lucian had not expected. Not by following his system, but by breaking its pattern. She spoke where silence was expected. She revealed what had been hidden. She forced a confrontation not built on control, but on truth, and in doing so, she changed the outcome. The conflict did not end cleanly. Nothing in Lucian's world ever did, but it ended differently than it would have without her, and that difference was everything. Afterward, the estate returned to silence, but it was not the same silence as before. This one carried something else. Finality. Lucian stood alone in the control room, the systems around him stabilizing, recalibrating, returning to order. Everything was back in place. Everything was under control, except one thing. Isabella. She stood at the edge of the space, no longer uncertain, no longer searching. She understood now, not just the system, not just the past, but herself. "I'm leaving," she said. Lucian didn't turn immediately, but the words did not go unnoticed. "You won't be followed," he said. Not a question, a statement. Isabella watched him carefully. For the first time, she said, "That sounds like a choice." A pause. Then Lucian turned. His gaze met hers. Steady, controlled, but not untouched. "You were never meant to stay," he said. The words should have felt like dismissal, but they didn't, because Isabella understood what he wasn't saying. She nodded once, then turned and walked away. Months later, the world outside felt different. Not safer, not simpler, but clearer. Isabella moved through it with a quiet awareness she hadn't possessed before. She was no longer the woman who had been pulled into something she didn't understand. She was someone who had faced it, learned it, changed it, but some things didn't leave. Some things stayed. And as she stood alone, the memory of Lucian's world still sharp in her mind, one truth settled deeper than anything else. She had not just survived him, she had changed him, because in the end, Lucian Moretti had built a world where nothing could control him, except one thing, the woman he had chosen. And as Isabella allowed herself one final moment to reflect on everything that had been, one realization echoed quietly but undeniably through her thoughts. He never intended to lose control, but she was the only one who made him understand what control truly costs.